But what I found in those paintings is I have found a gateway into a part of myself that I didn't know existed. You know, what he represents to me is somebody who has been able to paint the door, you know, the door to another consciousness. You know, he often said that his hope was that when somebody saw his painting, the only reaction they would have was to be overwhelmed. You know, that they would have a spiritual experience as a result of seeing that stuff, you know, because he was trying to tap into a higher consciousness. When I saw my very first Mark Rothko, that was my experience. You know, I went into it as prejudiced as you could possibly be about his kind of art. Like, I hate minimalist art, I hate modern art, can't stand any of that kind of stuff. And so, and I had watched a documentary that had talked about him, and in the documentary the guy said something to the effect of, like, Mark Rothko was the best painter that ever lived, and I was like, that's bullshit. Like, that's not a thing. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen amazing artists, and he's not the best artist. And so I was at the Met in New York and went and saw the whole museum, spent 4 days like walking around the Met, saw some amazing paintings. There's a Velasquez there that I absolutely love. And at the end I was like, well, I might as well go see the modern art section just so I can make fun of it. And so I went and of course the first thing I saw was that across the room there were a series of Rothko paintings. I mean, they're just super huge, triangular shapes of color. It's really easy to spot Rothko paintings. I went up to the first one, and it was just what I thought. It was just a bunch of colors on a painting, on a canvas, and I was like, yeah, I'm not really impressed with this. And I went over to the second painting, and it was a field of red with little dashes of blue here and there all over it. And I stood in front of this painting that was roughly the same size as I am, and everything turned red, and I became the color that he had painted. And I was completely blown away. And I stood in front of that painting for 15 minutes, just having this experience that and I realized, oh my God, this guy's the best artist that has ever lived. Like, I was a total unbeliever until I stood in front of that, and I was completely overwhelmed by it. And I went back and I told my teacher about it, because she's not somebody who's into modern art. And she goes, yeah, he's a wizard. Like, that guy's not making art, he's making something extra, something special, something really like profound. There is a spiritual experience to be had with that. And it really changed my perception of like what art is and what it can be and how it can affect people, and not just how it affects me. And I started to really, really think about Mark Rothko and like his process, and like the knowledge that people are going to see it and misunderstand it, and how amazing it is to be that unself-conscious. Because when I paint, I'm self-conscious. When I paint, I'm thinking about like whether people are going to understand it or not, whether or not people are going to like it, whether or not like I'm going to be accepted for it, or like whether it's too much or too over the top. And so I've got all this clutter in my head, you know, like all this stuff. And for somebody to paint something that is completely, not just unself-conscious, but the humility to paint something like that. You know what I mean? Like, it really takes real humility to paint something that you know is going to be broadly not accepted. And yeah, it really changed my perception. And that all ties into the whole King Crimson thing, because that was what I saw with Robert Fripp and like his guitar playing and stuff. It was super minimalist, very in the background. He was cool with not being a show off. He wasn't one of these people who was doing like crazy guitar riffs up front. And there was a sort of this baseline of like that same sort of sentiment where the art is more important than the artist, you know? And that whole idea really just speaks to me. But the title of artist is significant, you know? And I feel like it's one of those things that people need to reclaim that, and like it needs to be important again. You know, there's a difference between somebody who's a hobbyist or just sort of making something as opposed to somebody who is really actually contributing something to this thing, this living organism that is like that undercurrent of art that we've walked away from. Like there's very little of that in our culture, and I think that we're feeling that there's a bankruptcy in our experience.